Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to the people who've managed to have the stamina to still be here. Very good to see you. In terms of what I've been asked to talk about, the key messages and outcomes from the planning session that we had and looking at the products that we want out of the symposium, it really comes out of the thought which we've already shared with you, that we didn't want this to be just a one-off event, but something that generates a sense of urgency in dealing with things that you and all of us feel are really critical. So perhaps I've made a couple of points from our session that we had this morning, and so obviously we're still reflecting on it, and it's really, if I get the issues not quite right, it's simply because I think they're still going through our minds, and certainly my own. But I think the first thing that came through in the report backs from you, where you each filled in those forms and so on, we'll be working through those, but one of the things that came through is the kind of urgency in times of change, which is what we are in, to get our messages out there. In other words, you know, traditionally we would write in the scientific journals and 3 years later the articles will come out. And Professor Slotto is here, and I think he's going to be hopefully having a moment with us as well. But he'll tell you, he wants to know that what are you doing in your research? And I think what has come through from people like yourselves is, can we get those messages out very urgently? And the question is, how do we do that? And the sort of thinking that has come through from you in that respect is, we need to start thinking about how we create a learning society here, where we develop a kind of a knowledge bank, where you are all part of that we know who is here and our colleagues that we want to come in as well, and so that we can get the message out to these decision makers very, very quickly. So the question is, how can we do that? One of the thoughts that came through is it's very easy to duplicate what's already out there. And perhaps what we need to do, and the steering committee will obviously be meeting and reflecting on what you've told us and what we're thinking, will be to get some research underway through our students to look at what platforms we have available to get our stories out there, so that we make sure we really have platforms that engage with all kinds of people. One of the thoughts that's come through is that government is trying to do so much, but very often what happens is you start talking to yourself, local with provincial, with national government. We want fora where we can actually be up close and personal with everybody, all of those, and that the debate needs to be very strong and loud. And just as an example, 2 fora that came through very strongly around the ecosystems, goods and services. The way we'll start fashioning these forums, if they are to work, is to say, well, here, KZN Wildlife and Sandby are doing some really extraordinary good work there. So can we have them as the kind of champions that can take that sort of work forward? Obviously, during the week, you've heard and people have been debating at quite some length the question around wildlife crime, and can we call it habitat crime? So again, there's a real sense of urgency. What's happening out there? We know the message is not always coming back to us, and so what we need to do is to create these fora so that we understand what's going on, that we can react and be part of the ongoing debate to make things change. And I think all of that means that we will be looking at developing a database together with those that are available, so that we can profile all of you that are working together in these particular issues. A couple of other quick thoughts just to reflect back on what you've told us. For example, Lamachai was a journal that KZN Wildlife ran, and it kind of became defunct. And a lot of you said, hey, we want to really resuscitate this as an organ for getting some of these messages out. So it needs to reflect, the feeling was, and we want to hear from you and more about these things, but the conference has really been to try and bring together scientists and managers, and I think the convergence compared with 5 years ago when I heard people talking, is amazing. So we're starting to see that happening. And I think with that happening too, we need to make sure that this platform of Lamachai can get that philosophy out there, that practice is contemporary, whatever that is, but it moves on all the time, but it has these different stakeholders talking and developing the messages that we want. It needs to be refereed, and it also needs sections where we can maybe kind of tell people what's happening on the ground as well. That also led into some really interesting discussions about something that a lot of you feel very strongly about, and that's this question of how we engage with communities. Protected areas are only part of the landscape that we're now looking at, and it's a lot about those communities that we work with, the farmers, traditional communities, and so on. And we're looking at ways in which we can actually engage with this question of engaging the community. You know, what's working, what's not working? And so a number of us have been in what we call a kind of a writing workshop, where hopefully we'll invite some of you to get together. KZN Wildlife, we're taking the liberty of saying that they're going to provide accommodation, food, and all for this working group in one of their delightful places, and we can sit and contemplate our navel about what's working with communities and what's not, and maybe give a new impetus to the kind of work where, in fact, maybe things are not going as strongly as well as we want. So that also led on to the idea that at the next symposium, we really need to get the champions from communities here as well. Bill Bainbridge, is Bill still here? Or? There he is. Dr. Bainbridge was just reflecting on work that he's doing in one of our communities and saying that at COP17, he was able to get not the Nkosi himself, but the Nkosi's son, who was amazing at COP17. He really brought the audience into his world in a way that those of us who are working from the outside can't do. And so I think the very strong feeling is, while all of us are working so intently and in a committed way with communities, we need to get those champions as well. So the farmers need to be here with their boots, the sort of dried milk from, milking the cows. They need to be here as well as the community members. There were a number of other interesting things coming through, and they will lead me to, I think, the last point I want to make, and that is there needs to be space and place for connecting, and I hope we've made some of that available, but we have worked you hard in the sense that there's been work ongoing the whole time, and so that's an interesting place. You know, how do we connect, make you connect? Obviously, the one very important point that was made is you can have a glass of water or Coke at the pub, and this is a very good way of communicating. Somebody might like something stronger, like coffee, something like that. But I mean, that's we want to create that space, and hopefully we've done some of that at the conference. The other thing that was really interesting is this idea of an open day. Maybe what we need to do is open ourselves to bring in people from the outside so they can also hear and learn from what we are talking about. And in the plenaries, a really lovely idea. You know, we all hear, we hear the keynote speakers that we've brought in, but wouldn't it be great to find out what your challenges are at the moment and what you're hoping to achieve? So at the same time as we're wanting to connect, let people know what you're doing, and in that way you start networking right from the beginning of the plenary sessions. And I think that engaging with all of us from the start is really critical. And I think that brings me to the last point, Mr. Chair, that I want to make. And that is, I think, as a committee, we put a lot of work into getting you all here, and it's been a wonderful journey, and we've really come to find those committee spaces important. But we thought, you know, every 2 years would be more than enough to see your faces and so on, and you to see ours. But in fact, that's not the feeling that's coming through. The sense is there's a very particular kind of group that we've brought together where we're looking at a more, not a particular area in conservation, but we're trying to look at this whole space of what's happening now and the link between practice and the whole idea of the science behind the practice. And so I think two critical things have come through. we want to bring the best from outside to our conferences, and we want to attract you people who've given the conference such an amazing feel of professionalism. But we also want to bring in the young scientist, and you've heard our Jean and her team have been so keen to do that, and I think those of us who are partnering with KZN Wildlife feel exactly the same. And I know certainly the university has very much the same idea. We've got to bring in new young scientists. And finally, I think the idea then is that the symposium seems to be something that we need to do annually. And that would be wonderful, because I think as a group of people who've really come together with passion, insight, that's what you brought to the table for us. Mr. Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Before you run away, can I just maybe find out if there are any comments or questions that anybody would like to ask the Prof?
Maybe the group could also add other things.
Or any additions to that, because we are drawing to the end of the symposium and we would like to be able to get as much input as possible in the limited time that we have. Going once, twice. Oh, here you go. We've got a taker. Sorry, the rule is you have to speak on the mic. The mic is coming to you, sir.
Hi, Matthew. Is there some sort of a forum or avenue for communicating with the steering committee? Comments, questions going forward?
Okay, we've got a question, Prof. If you want me to repeat it, what's the avenue to communicate with the steering committee?
If you're under 25 and have a nice photograph, we'd use that as a starting point. Very good point. I think that we need to, Jean and team, I think this is a very important point. How do we keep communicating, and how can people communicate with us? Obviously, there's the website, but do we want to have a particular person? Can Gerda continue in that role?
I think at this point it would be probably a good idea if we note the need for a channel to communicate with us, and the steering committee are going to meet after this, shortly after this symposium, just to distill what would be most useful around those things. So we might keep an email address open linked to this, connected to the website, but I think we need to work out those and then communicate with you. So you should all be getting a communication from us in the next week or so, kind of letting you know how those things might pan out and what's on the website, etc.
And thank you. I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, we'd like to keep communicating.